This whole idea of sustainability is really, it's kind of trendy right now, but it's also really, really relevant. The idea, when we think of sustainability, quite often people think of environmental sustainability, and there's been strong movement since the 70s in helping us really move towards that end. And Parks and Recreation is a key player in environmental sustainability with our conservation efforts and really trying to take care of the environment that we live in. But the other elements include this social recreational sustainability. How do we help our community thrive? How do we keep people active? All the things that I've been talking about. And then the financial and economic sustainability. A community can't offer these things if they go bankrupt and if they don't have the proper funding or if they don't offer the right things that people value and will contribute their own funds to. So part of our role in Parks and Recreation, and to be relevant, we have to create a triangulation of all of these elements, and our goal is to provide that organizational balance, really representing what the community wants and needs, and so that we're really attending to all of those things. This proper mix of conservation versus active activities is a really strong feature of most management systems for Parks and Recreation. We have to have natural lands, but we also have to have active components. So where do we put those things, and how do we balance that in any given community is a large part of what we need to do. In community planning, you'll hear a lot of things about planning, and in Parks and Recreation management, planning is very important because if we don't provide that vision for the decision makers and for the public, they don't have a reason to know why we exist. We are constantly needing to show them. So in a community plan, I like to use this graphic to talk about how our plans fit within the overall community system. Most communities have a large comprehensive plan, whether that is a comprehensive plan or a statewide comp plan. All states are required to have that. Most communities have to have some sort of comprehensive plan to be able to get federal dollars, and so you usually have a large guiding plan. Parks and Recreation and the services we're talking about, it may be called something different in your community. It may be leisure services or community services or Parks, Recreation, and Libraries or some other name that the community has come up with. But really, that department that handles these quality of life features typically has a departmental master plan. And so from that master plan, our job is to make sure that we have what we call a needs assessment. We are looking at the needs of the community and we have a strong pulse on what the community wants. We also have a strong pulse on operations. What's out there right now? What do we currently have and how are they being operated and maintained? And then the idea of the strategic plan is that we have set goals that help our community understand where do we want to be in 5 years, 10 years, and maybe even a long-term vision. From each of these, we then delve down deeper into the idea of site-specific planning. Each large park site in a community probably has a large park master plan that's site-specific, or there may be conceptual studies or feasibility studies done if your community is considering putting in a new recreation center or a performing arts center or some sort of large sports complex. We have to determine how will that work? Who will use it? How will we pay for it? And how will we run it for the long term so that it maintains its sustainability over time? Underneath the red line, you see that there are a variety of different plans also. These all have to align because nothing happens in a community unless there's policy that governs that. And that's usually set at the upper level, whoever those decision makers, whether it's a board or a council or whoever that is. Also, nothing happens without money. So unless an operating budget or a capital budget is allocated, nothing that we plan for is ever going to happen. And so those have to be in line. And in addition, we also have to have work plans. Our staff, whoever we hire to do this in our community, has to know how to do it. We often joke that, in a community, recreation is fun and play for those people doing it, but when you're managing it, it's work. And it's very important that you have your work plan set up so you know how to do that effectively so that you don't get burnt out or it becomes overwhelming. So all of these plans have to be aligned in order for a community to have a strong feeling of relevance within the community. And when you have communities that are thriving, most often they have these plans aligned and they have agreement and consensus for that community. When you see a community that's going bankrupt or people are moving away or something bad is happening, quite often it's because these plans are not in place or the vision is not being conveyed, or for some reason people don't understand the value of quality of life and so they're not willing to invest in it. To get the information on needs assessment, this is just some, I'm not going to go through all of these obviously, but this is just kind of a starting place for us. We look at what are all the tools out there, and obviously determining methodology. Do we want qualitative tools such as focus groups or public meetings or things like that where we're really hearing the kind of the what people want? Or do we want quantitative tools where we're actually measuring and using statistics and quantifying what the answers are? All of those are out there. There's hundreds and hundreds of them, so there's no way that we could list them all. But what I'm trying to convey here is that to make it relevant as a Parks and Recreation professional or someone in the community trying to understand how this works, you have to have a mix of methodologies. And so we typically use a mixed method. We first start with who do we want to find out from? Who is important? Is it the stakeholders? Is it the public? Decision makers? Do we want to bring in outside expertise? Who do we need to get the information from? But the bottom line is, what are the outcomes that we're trying to get? Are we trying to pass a new tax or a bond issue? Are we trying to build a new center? Are we trying to just offer better programs or provide social justice and equity in a community? So all of those pieces are part of the planning process, and they're part of helping us convey that relevance. The other large part of this, I keep talking about the funding and the money that we need. Nothing happens without money, and this is true in the public sector, nonprofit sector, and private sector. We need to have consensus on where that money should come from. One of the things in Parks and Recreation we haven't been so good about in the last 40 years is helping people understand how the resources are not just being thrown into a pile, but we are providing a return on investment. So ROI means return on investment. So the idea of how measuring that return on investment, whether we're looking at the direct return, people pay fees, or we may have taxes coming in, or the indirect benefits. Things like conservation really help take care of the land, and there's economic benefits from having a tree canopy, or preserving lands, or having better stormwater management, things like that. The income growth, we know that communities that have good quality of life attract businesses. They also attract people. And so when a community decides to cut their Parks and Recreation department just because they're short on funding, it's usually pretty short-sighted, because what happens is that the businesses understand that that community does not value quality of life, and they're not going to move their people there. Nobody wants to live someplace where you don't have a safe place to play or to be or to take your kids or a program to do for something that you love. And so the income growth is directly tied to how much is invested in the quality of life programs in a community. The capacity, the rooms, all of the tourism industry, all of those private businesses that are often, we don't say, well, it's Parks and Recreation, it's public. The reality is a lot of those private sector jobs and businesses rely very, very closely to what we offer in the public sector. And so looking at that mix within a community and being able to articulate that mix to our decision makers so they understand that investment in a large tournament facility can provide a very strong return on investment for hotels and those types of things. We know that increased property values are directly aligned with your location relative to having Parks and Recreation. The Realtors Association knows this, and across the world, they have decided, when they locate homes closer to parks and trails and recreation facilities, they can charge a premium value for those homes. And so they get that. We haven't been as good about doing that within the public sector, so we need to make sure that relevance is conveyed. So the bottom line, though, is communication. And a lot of these things I've been talking about, you go, well, yeah, I know that, or anecdotally, yes, of course that's true. Because in our field of quality of life or management or Parks and Recreation, we know it in our hearts. We have not always been so good about communicating it. And one of the things that happens is people who are not of our mindset naturally have to be told. And so to create relevance in Parks and Recreation, we need to constantly communicate. One of the ways that we can do that is by using new tools. This is a representation of what we call a perspective or an analytical mapping of all of the components. There's typically about 100+ components of a system within Parks and Recreation within a community that are, so you go in and you basically do an inventory using geographic information systems. You map those, and then we can get into the detail. It's not just where they are, but we can also do a functional analysis. We can find out how people get there. And all of this, then, the bottom line for me as a manager or as somebody who's looking at systems planning is that I want to be able to convey that information quickly to decision makers and the public. So what I'm showing here is a perspective for Cary, North Carolina. It's just one example. This one's about walkable access to all components within their system. And as we show this to their city council, it's very clear where the gaps are. The darker shades indicate a higher level of service from the components that they're providing, where the lighter shades are where there may be gaps. And so we need to look at why there are gaps and what might need to be done within that system. This can be done for any of the facilities and lands that are managed, and they go right into capital planning for a community, and they go right into whether or not you'll pay more taxes. So even if you're thinking about not being a Parks and Recreation professional, but you're going to live in a community, which I think we all are, then you will need to at some point be affected by how much tax you pay, and you will be able to vote on that. So having this kind of information to help you really clearly understand where things should go, how many recreation centers you need, how many parks there should be, how much land. This is one of the new tools that's really kind of progressed rapidly in the last 10 years, is this whole idea of composite values methodology, or component-based inventory and mapping. So I've just quickly given you an idea and a summary of a variety of the things that are out there about how Parks and Recreation are and can be a key in the communities. And bottom line is, we are facilitating the opportunities for both active recreation and economic development. We control and manage most of the public areas within a community, and so the idea of providing access to them, helping make sure that the transportation options are good for a community is very, very important. And then also, we often have the ear of the leaders in our community, our elected officials, and we report directly to them at some level. So having the ability to mobilize community-wide initiatives we often have, when you get moms or seniors involved, often we get a very strong voice. We start creating champions in our community. And so by taking notice of that and taking advantage of that, we can really help to mobilize things in a positive way within a community. And then I really firmly believe it's our job and our responsibility to inform and educate about healthy lifestyle choices. And so I started this by talking about how do we help communities thrive. After all of my career, I firmly believe that these things are the key to a community's development, and they're as important as any other element that's offered within a community, and sometimes they can offer much more impact than we give them credit for. So I hope this brief presentation has given you some food for thought. If you have any questions, please feel free to contact me, and I'd be happy to answer anything or provide more information on any of the topics that I've talked about. Thank you very much.